love the gospel of the Lord.
Heart to Heart, a Catholic media ministry, presents an inspiring gospel reflection by Father Michael Sparrow. Father Michael is a Jesuit priest working as a writer and retreat master at the Bellarmine Jesuit Retreat House outside Chicago.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. While the people were listening to Jesus speak, he proceeded to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they thought that the kingdom of God would appear there immediately. So he said, a nobleman went off to a distant country to obtain the kingship for himself and then to return. He called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 gold coins and told them, engage in trade with these until I return. His fellow citizens, however, despised him and set out a delegation against him to announce, we do not want this man to be our king. But when he returned after obtaining the kingship, he had the servants called to whom he had given the money to learn what they had gained by trading. The first came and said, Sir, your gold coin has earned us an additional 10. He replied, well done, good servant. You have been faithful in very small matter. Take charge of 10 cities. Then the second came and said to him, your gold coin, sir, has earned 5 more. And to this, the servant, he said, you too take charge of 5 cities. Then the other servant came and said, sir, here is your gold coin. I stored it away in a handkerchief because I was afraid of you, because you are a demanding man. You take up what you did not lay down, and you harvest where you did not plant. He said to him, with your own words I shall condemn you, you wicked servant. You knew I was a demanding man, taking up what I did not lay down and harvesting where I did not plant. Why did you not put my money in a bank? Then on my return I would have it collected with interest. And to those standing by he said, take the gold coin from him and give it to the servant who has 10. But they said to him, sir, he has 10 gold coins. He replied, I tell you, to everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Now, as for those enemies of mine who did not want me as their king, bring them here and slay them before me. After he had said this, he proceeded on his journey up to Jerusalem. The Gospel of the Lord. Today's gospel, I suspect, is a familiar one. It appears twice in slightly different forms. Today's version in the Gospel of Luke, and it's also in the Gospel of Matthew. You'll recall that in Matthew's Gospel, the story is told with just 3 servants. In Luke's version, there are 10 servants who are given the coin. But the point of the story seems to be pretty much the same in both of the stories, that the king or the noble bestows these gifts and expects a return on his investment. Now, we don't want to make the mistake of applying this as an allegory. It's a parable. An allegory, there's a one-to-one correspondence between each element of the story, whereas a parable, there's a general theme. This is not an allegory, and the Lord is not to be taken as God himself, because this man obviously doesn't embody all of the characteristics of what Jesus came to reveal in God. He's harsh, he's demanding, and he has an angry streak in him, and that he slays all those who don't want him to be king. That's certainly not the vision of the Lord. I think as Jesus tells this parable, the part of the point that he gets to is Here's people that are like yourselves, that emulate your own values. You know, you want to reward those who are industrious, and you want to punish those who are against you. Aren't those your values? So Jesus gives them a sampling of what they would say. The point of that is God's graciousness is so much greater than what we ourselves hold. But as a building point, if we expect a return on our own investment, I think at a minimum, the parable is saying, would not God have that right to expect the same of each of us? The Lord has invested in us time and talent and treasure. And the Lord is asking that we would use the time and the talent and the treasure that God has given us to make a difference in this world. This is a good time for us to reflect on in this season of November, as we approach the season of Thanksgiving, to reflect on the many gifts that God has given us. And the words of the response psalm, to give God praise and thanks, and to reflect on how am I using what God has given me to make of this world a slightly better place. We can always look to somebody to the right or to the left and they say, well, they have more than me, or they're so much better off than me. But let's look at not what we don't have, but let's look at what we do have and how can we use that to glorify God. As I was reflecting on this and praying about it, an example came to mind of a friend of mine in Cincinnati, Roger Grein. Roger was born in 1942 to an unwed mother. His mother initially thought that she was going to abort him, but then had second thoughts and put him up for adoption. He was adopted by Fred and Thelma Grein, a childless couple who were just delighted to be able to have to adopt a child. But they noticed as Roger began to grow as an infant that there were some abnormalities, and later Roger would be diagnosed with cerebral palsy. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life and had a noticeable speech defect. But his mother loved him and never gave up on him. The doctors had said that Roger would probably never speak and that he would probably never be able to walk. But his mother was the quintessential dedicated mother and didn't give up on him and kept saying to Roger, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. Taught his son to walk, taught her son to speak, even though her husband had been called away to serve in World War II. Roger became very industrious. He tells the story as a young boy, he was collecting pop bottles. You could get pennies for certain kinds of bottles and nickels for others, and he collected those and he got enough money, and then he bought a wagon. And then with a wagon, he became a newspaper salesman. He was selling his newspapers. And he loved sports, but because of his physical defects, he was never able to make the team. But one of the teachers noticed the industriousness of Roger and made him manager of the team. And so he became manager of the basketball team, manager of the baseball team, manager of just about any team at every season of the year. He was the manager, and he would bring water to the kids, and he was known as the water boy. Roger was, despite his physical defects, Roger was very bright. He had an aptitude for math. He went to Xavier University. He got an MBA, and then he went on and he became an accountant. And he became known in Cincinnati as the tax man. And because Roger has a warm, magnanimous heart about him, people just were delighted to have him do their taxes. He developed his own tax firm. And he became quite savvy in investing his money in the stock market. He soon became a multimillionaire. But Roger because of the hardships that he had endured in his own life, started giving away large amounts of money. Every year he would write over 300 checks for various philanthropic causes that touched his heart. And then, because of his love of sports, he became a manager for a girls' softball team, because he noticed that the girls didn't have the same advantages that the boys did. And his baseball team went on to world championships. They traveled all over the world. Then he noticed that, these were girls that are in high school, and he noticed that was great when they were in high school and they had all these opportunities, but then many of them couldn't get into college. Well, Northern Kentucky University opened the first softball team for girls on a collegiate level. So he donated a huge amount of money to set up a scholarship program so that the girls on his team could go and get scholarships to be able to go to college, and he continued to give generously. Well, he was talking to a couple of his business friends, and they said, I think what would be great is if college students could be taught, they could be given some money, and they could be taught the value of philanthropy. Well, Roger just loved that idea, and he went to Father Mike Graham, the Jesuit president of Xavier University, and he said, how about if I give you some money, and then you set up this program of teaching students to give money away to charitable causes. I'll give them the money, but they have to decide where they're going to give the money to. Well, Father Graham thought that was a great idea. And then Roger, who was worth about $7 million at the point, went to 16 different colleges, and he set up these scholarship programs teaching the students philanthropy. Well, in 2008, in the banking crisis, most of Roger's money was invested in banking stocks, and he lost nearly everything. He lost over $6 million because he was not diversified in his portfolio. And he had commitments at that point to these 16 different colleges for this philanthropy program. So he went to the presidents of every one of those colleges, and he said, look, I lost almost all of my money. I can't continue to fund these scholarships, but this is a worthwhile program. What can you do to ensure that this program is going to continue? And then he wrote everybody that he knew, and I had been one of the recipients, which is part of the reason, with the theater program that I was directing in Cincinnati. I had received money from Bellarmine, and from Roger, and lo and behold, I get a begging letter from Roger saying, hey, can you give back to this scholarship program? He wrote those letters to everybody that he knew. And amazingly enough, what happened was, because he was humble enough to ask on behalf of this program, people started giving. And it was no longer Roger Grein, as he describes the story, giving of his largesse. It was all of these people in the community. And what was grown from that was this program called Magnified Giving, which is now has over 100 schools, grade schools, high schools, and colleges, and continues to grow, has a full-time staff, and tens of thousands of students have benefited from this program. I tell that story because I think it's the embodiment of this parable of Roger, who was born physically handicapped with a speech defect that he still has to this day. When I watch him walk, I'm always worried about whether he's going to trip and fall. But what he didn't have didn't hold him back from what he does have. He used his gifts and talents not only to give to others, but to encourage and teach others to use the gifts that they have to make a difference. All of us are invested by God with gifts and talents. How can we use our time? How can we use our talent? How can we use our treasure to make of this world a little better place? In this season of Thanksgiving, as we approach this high holiday in our country, let's reflect on the ways that God has gifted us and the ways we can gift others. Amen.
Heart to heart, hand in hand, praying for grace to understand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel